All right, Kim, what's on your radar today?
Well, we are now 2 years from the start of this pandemic, and believe it or not, we're in our sixth wave. That's right, sixth wave. This wave being the most significant in the number of cases. And we're seeing a variety of responses from maybe we should just live with it to, we're going to blame the unvaccinated, to some countries just feeling defeated with no idea of what to do next. So we're going to take a look at where we're at today, 2 years into this pandemic, what some countries are thinking in regards to how this ends, if ever. And I'm going to share with you some of the stories of just how nuts this pandemic has driven some people. So let's start off by zooming in on Europe. First, let's take a look at how we're doing 2 years into this pandemic. You can see here, this is the daily new cases. You can see the various different waves. And look at that last wave. That's the one we're in right now. It is 3 times larger than the previous waves before it. So Omicron is definitely spreading much faster. Now, it could be that Omicron is more transmissible, like they said, but it also could just be behavior. People are kind of fed up with the pandemic. And so they're going out, they're doing things. We're not living under lockdowns and whatnot. Now, look at the death rates, the global deaths. Now, this one is obviously, we're doing better. So even though we're seeing that huge spike in cases, we are not seeing that same spike in deaths at the moment. In fact, we have been slowly lowering our death numbers wave after wave after wave since that third wave. And then the fourth wave was a little better, and the fifth wave was a little better, and this sixth wave looks like it's even better than the last. So that's kind of important to look at. But let's go ahead and zoom in on certain parts of the world. Let's start with Europe. Now, if we look at Europe's cases, I did add the United States into this just so that we have a point of reference. But look at that. Again, it parallels the graph we just saw with the number of cases spiking in this particular wave. You've got Ireland way up there at the top, then France. Now, Ireland has lower measures put in place than France. France has a much stricter measures. In fact, Emmanuel Macron, his strategy, he says, is that he is going to piss off the unvaccinated. That is his strategy moving forward after this sixth wave, blaming it still on the unvaccinated, even though vaccinated people are transmitting this just as much. Portugal, Switzerland, all the way down at the bottom, you have Austria and Germany, Netherlands, and Belgium. Down below the United States. But interestingly, the United States is kind of in the middle of the pack in comparison to the case rates going on in Europe. And, all of these countries have a variety of different strategies. So you can't really say, oh, it's that they were really, really harsh. And so that works like in France. But then, it's a little bit lighter in other areas. But let's look at their death rates, because that's what matters now. We should be focusing more on the death rates than on the transmissibility of the virus, because it seems like everyone's getting it. Now, on this one, you could see, once again, the death rates are lower. That's a good thing. We should be saying, hey, we're working our way out of this, although the United States is at the top of this list. So interestingly, even though the U.S. has lower cases, the U.S. still is topping this list at the death rate. That could be because Omicron has not quite overtaken the United States as much as it has Europe. Could be obesity rates in the United States, general unhealth, unclear. But the United States is leading the pack. Netherlands, all the way down at the bottom. Ireland, all the way down at the bottom as well when it comes to the deaths per million. Now, this is per million, and this is the 7-day rolling average on that. But what's interesting about Europe is the various strategies that the countries are now talking about. So on one hand, you got Spain. Spain has now announced that they're going to have some meetings on whether or not to start treating COVID like the flu. So they're saying, look, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of getting out of this. People have either been already infected, which, by the way, in Europe, previous infection counts as a vaccination. So they're saying you've either caught COVID by now, you've been vaccinated by now. So we're really just needing to maybe treat this like the flu. And what they mean by that is they're wanting to stop counting cases, which I think is probably important. They want to stop counting cases and instead want to focus on ER visits and hospitalizations. That's the way they surveil the flu, their flu surveillance and other respiratory illness surveillance that goes on in that country. They just focus on the hospitalizations, and that's what they're saying they want to discuss. And then they say after they decide on it as a country, they also want to be discussing this as an entire EU strategy. These countries cannot just be sort of each doing their own thing. Again, France is saying, Emmanuel Macron made some waves. People were very upset about his statement saying that he wants to piss off the unvaccinated. That is his strategy moving forward. So he's going to make life extra difficult on the unvaccinated people in France. That has caused widespread protests. In fact, there's still widespread protests all throughout Europe. Millions of people are in the streets throughout Europe protesting. People who are mostly fully vaccinated protesting actually these vaccine mandates. Italy, their strategy is they've moved towards mandating the vaccine for anyone over the age of 50. I think that's an interesting strategy. I'm totally against mandates. I do not think the government or your boss or anyone should be forcing you or coercing you or somehow, making you feel like you must get the vaccine. But if you were going to mandate it for somebody, it makes actual more sense to say anybody over the age of 50. They're the ones who have the worst outcomes. They're the ones who require the hospitalization and who end up, unfortunately, passing away from COVID. So that makes the most sense, even though, again, totally against the mandates. Other countries in Europe, Scandinavian countries, they are now also sort of clamping down on, they're encouraging more social distancing. They're saying groups of 8, any larger than groups of 8 cannot dine together in restaurants and got to kind of limit. They don't do things like vaccine only can go do this or people must be mandated to do that. The Scandinavian countries are not operating that way, but they are encouraging a lot of social distancing and they maybe have some border restrictions. Germany and Austria, they're causing a lot of uproar. Austria has mandated the entire population get the vaccine by February. So people have to get that vaccine in the next few weeks. And Germany is also discussing doing the same thing. So, there's still sort of this war on the unvaccinated going on in Europe. But some countries like the Scandinavian countries say that's unethical. And that's discrimination. And then there's countries like Spain saying, I think it's time to maybe live with it. So it's really interesting what is going on in Europe and how they're handling this 6th wave. I can't say it enough. We're in 6 waves, guys, 6, and we're 2 years in. But let's go ahead and look over at Israel and what is going on there. Now, Israel has led the pack as being the leader in vaccination. They have boosted. So most everybody in their population has not only had 2 doses, but now 3. And they've even moved on to 4th doses of the vaccine for people over the age of 60 in Israel. And yet here they are. Look at this. They are way above, even the United States, in COVID cases per million, daily new confirmed COVID cases per million, 7-day rolling average. They are skyrocketing in cases. So, but, let's go ahead and look at their deaths while we're looking at these charts. The Israeli death rate is low. So again, that goes to show us right there that now it is upticking a bit. And they are warning that 3rd dose does wear off, and they're not sure how long that 4th dose will last. But they are doing better than the United States when it comes to death. So I think there's something to be said there, that the vaccine does seem to help for those who are the most vulnerable, elderly, people that suffer from comorbidities. They do fare better as far as severe COVID and death when it comes to and getting that vaccine does help them with that. But it doesn't seem to stop the cases. And stopping the cases is why we have mandates, why we're told that we have to lock down. All of that has to do with spread. And it doesn't look like anything's stopping the spread. So Israel, facing their 4th dose, is saying, I don't know. What are we going to do? We've tried it all. We've done all of this vaccination. We can't really sit there and jab the population every couple of months. So what are we going to do? They don't really know. They're kind of the public is starting to say, look, there's no strategy. And the government, when you read what they have to say, it's flipping every day. They don't really know. And it's clear that they're sort of at a loss. And they're just kind of saying, I don't know. I don't know what to do now. So this pandemic, here we are 2 years in, as I've mentioned, 6 waves in, and we have not figured out what to do. This COVID versus man is losing when it comes to this. There's no seeming to stop this virus, and the pandemic is driving people nuts. I just want to share with you some stories, outrageous stories of how nutty this pandemic has caused people to go. A Chicago woman, was traveling from Chicago with her family to Switzerland. They made a stop in Iceland mid-plane. She tests herself getting on the plane several times. While she's on the plane, she starts to feel sick. So she decides for peace of mind that she's going to test herself again. She's carrying COVID tests with her on the plane. She then takes a COVID test and discovers that it's positive. She freaks out. She doesn't know what to do. She's thinking she's going to kill herself and everybody, not kill herself like that, but, COVID's going to kill her. She's thinking COVID's going to kill her and she's going to kill all the passengers around her. So she locks herself in an airplane bathroom for hours on end until it reaches Iceland, where she ends up quarantining, and her family goes on to Switzerland because they tested negative. So she stays in Iceland during the entire vacation. Never, by the way, gets sick actually in Iceland. She's just having a good time and TikToking all kinds of stories. Another crazy story, a woman, a teacher in Houston, her 13-year-old son tested positive for COVID. What does she do? She's got to take him to get a second test for verification. So she locks him in the trunk, naturally, of the car as she drives off to go and get him tested. She said she didn't want to get COVID. So she locked her 13-year-old son in a trunk. She's now been charged with child endangerment. This is a really, really awful story. This one comes out of Australia. And Australia has been extra nutty when it comes to COVID. But a woman was actually badly tortured. She was captured by her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend. For whatever reason, they captured her. They held her hostage for a week where they tortured her. Literally, they cut off a finger. They burned her. She finally figured out a way to escape their hostage. They're holding her hostage. She runs off to a grocery store. She's missing a finger, and she gets to the grocery store and they won't help her because she's not wearing a mask. She was turned away. So she ends up going and finding another place. They end up helping her out, calling the police. She's asking for a cab, but they also would not allow her in. They told her she wasn't wearing a mask, so she needed to stand outside. I mean, give me a break. What is going on here? A woman is missing a finger, Emily, and they're sitting there saying, oh, no, you can't come in because you're not wearing a mask. This pandemic has driven us now nuts. There's no stopping this thing. What are we doing? Are we just going to continue allowing this to make us go this crazy? And I know these are outlier cases, right? These are like the most extreme, but you kind of see inklings of this just in your daily life going around. Maybe not this level, but still, like families not wanting to get together for Thanksgiving, saying, no, if you're unvaccinated, we can't have you around here. This is causing some serious nuttiness.
Oh, yeah.
What do we...
No, I think you're right that while there's this, while these are outlier and you call them COVID crazy cases, there's something that they're representing, and something that I've been thinking through a lot on my podcast recently is that there's the seed that's been planted in some percentage of the population to fear other people irrationally. It's a seed of irrationality that our expert class, capital E, has planted in the minds of a lot of people about irrational fears and irrational understanding of safety and risk and danger. And I don't know that it'll ever go away in a certain group of people, in a certain percentage of the population, because this was genuinely very traumatic for them, because they were taking some of this stuff way too literally and not listening to other people, just sort of, taking what the experts were saying, treating it as unimpeachable fact, locking themselves in bathrooms, locking their kids in the trunks of their car, all of these different things. So I don't think we fully yet understand how this is going to affect our culture for years and years to come. I think the general population will be okay, but I do think there's a chunk that is way too big in size of people that will always carry around irrational fear because of this.
Yeah, it seems like everybody has been traumatized by this pandemic, whether they be traumatized like what we're seeing, these COVID crazies, or people that are just really upset about all the mandates and the hindrance on their lives, locking down, just parents angry about their kids not being able to go to school. We're seeing this uprising, and then people are being labeled as white supremacist, racist, bigots, terrorists, all for, the masses coming out and saying we are not okay with this. And I find that particularly interesting that all of these people protesting, for example, in Europe and here in the United States, these are working class folks. These are not racist bigots, or these are average people out there. And yet still people are saying, oh, no. They're not the progressive people. They're all just a bunch of bigots. It's really fascinating to me how this has really shifted our culture. And I do worry for the health of our culture going forward. But I think a lot of it is because we haven't been able to stop the spread. Look at where we're at now. And so people are at a loss, and it is driving them crazier and crazier. And so governments need to get this under control, and not the COVID under control, but just the mentality under control, I think, at this point.
I think that's very well said. Kim, thank you so much, and we will have more Rising after this.